In just 7 verses, Mark is able to give us an account of what happened in Lake Galilee. This is entitled The Coming of the Storm. If I had a chance to give a title, I would prefer to give a different title. I would title this story as The Crossing of the Lake. And the reason is because the crossing was an ordinary way for the people of the time of Jesus. If you notice, the lake is very big. It is actually around 53 kilometers in length, more or less like the Laguna Lake. No? The Laguna Lake, I suppose, is like 41 kilometers in length. So more or less, it is that size. And the Sea of Galilee, of course, if people will travel around it, it will take some time. And remember that in the time of Jesus, there were no cars. So the easiest way to go from one point to the other, especially on the other side of the lake, is precisely to go by boat. So going by boat is really the ordinary transportation. And it is not as if people were not aware of the dangers of crossing. Crossing the lake was always a dangerous thing. And the disciples, particularly the apostles, knew. They were fishermen, so they know exactly the nature of this lake, that it is easily sort of disturbed by any wind. So we can say that the coming of the storm is like, well, it is a miracle. No? And I don't think that Mark sort of narrated this story to tell us about a miracle of Jesus. No, I think he told the story precisely because he wanted to teach a lesson from Jesus from the ordinary way it is. So, walking on we may say that this traveling or crossing the Sea of Galilee is precisely the ordinary thing. And it is in this ordinary thing that something happened. So, in this very short story, we have so many things there. No? Number one, you have the crossing, you have the storm actually raging, and while the storm is raging, you see Jesus is presented as comfortably sleeping on the stern. Then you have there the accusation of the disciples. How come that he does not seem to care? And then also, what happened there is after he did something, he did the miracle of calming the storm, what happened is that Jesus now rebukes the apostles or the disciples for lacking faith. I think that the whole story precisely is contained in what Jesus was asking them at the end. In the end of the story, Jesus is asking, why did you fear? Why did you still have no faith? So that is in essence what this story is all about. No? Now, I think that this story is a very important story for all Christians and for us, disciples of the Lord, because this is about crossing the lake. And we may say that crossing really is an important aspect of our lives. Every day, we do some crossings in our actual life. No? And it may not be that it is not a crossing the lake, but it is always crossing something. Like in our own lives, that is why we celebrate birthdays, because it is crossing from one stage to the other. When you go to school, that is why there are graduations to celebrate. You're moving up or sort of crossing from this stage to another. There are people who celebrate their crossing from one state of life to the other, from being single to being married. And eventually, this crossing of our life to the next life. So, our life really is full of crossings. And what the Lord is telling us is that in all these crossings, if the Lord is not with us, it will always be very terrible crossings. We will not know what to do. We will not know what will happen. So that is why we have to keep on asking the Lord's presence. And one important thing here is the reaction of the apostles when they accused the Lord. And that was really an accusation. Why don't you seem to not care that we are perishing? I think that this reaction of the disciples is something that we can relate with, because in most of the crossings, we may say, of life, we always make accusations against the Lord. And the accusation is always with the belief that we are more concerned. Like in this case, why don't you care? No? As if they cared more than Jesus himself. And this is also the same accusation that we make of God in every aspects of our life. When something happens to us, as if we always accuse the Lord of not being concerned. I am very sure that so many people already accuse the Lord, probably not verbally, but in their hearts, they accuse the Lord. It's already 1 year with the pandemic. Is God not concerned with us? And that is always the human accusation. And of course, God will give the same answer. And we can never make that accusation as if we are more caring than the Lord. There are people, when they suffer some injustices in this world, people will always make the judgment, like when there's a terrible accident, when there are rapes, etc. Is God not concerned? As if we are more concerned than God. We should never make that mistake, just like the disciples. We can never be more concerned about anything about life than the Lord. He cares more, and sometimes we don't understand how He cares for us. We don't understand how fair He is, but we should never make that accusation. Now, I think what is important really in this story of Mark is that probably this is related to his experience in the early church. In the early church, there were so many, they also lacked faith because of the persecution. They ended up already losing their faith. And he reminds them, just like in this, we may say, miracle of crossing the sea, that God will do something about it. So we should continue to have faith in pandemic times like our time, in any crossing about life. Crossing is always dangerous, always full of problem. But if we take these crossings with the Lord, if we cross with the Lord in our life, every crossing, of course, will be enjoyable. Every crossing will be meaningful for each and every one of us. Also, there is something that is in this story, which probably the hearers of Jesus during that time, they understand it, but we don't understand it because we don't know the background. The background is this. The Jewish people knew about the story of Jonah. Jonah, who was asked to go to Nineveh, and he went the opposite side. No? And we know that the story tells us that a storm, when he was on the sea, a storm came, and that storm came from God. No? And what happened is that they were being tossed about. No? And Jonah went down and slept. So you see, Jonah is sleeping, and then all the crew scolded him. We are all perishing and you are still sleeping there. Do something. Pray to your God that something will happen. Now, why is it? Immediately when you have this story in the gospel, the Jewish people know this story, and they would easily relate it to the story of the coming of the sea. So which means to say that Mark is also trying to say that just as this happened with Jonah, so Jesus now is presented as a new Jonah. He is more powerful than Jonah. That is why the gospel says that someone greater than Jonah is here. Which means to say that if Jonah was able to do something to free the people in a storm where he was, well, there is no reason why Jesus cannot do the same. And we also know that in the Psalms, only God is given that power of being able to calm the winds, the storms, everything. And here Jesus is presented as having that power. So which means to say that Jesus is presented also as Son of God. Truly, He is Son of God because He can do the things that His Father is able to do. So a short reflection for all of us. We are all undergoing some crossings in our own personal lives. This crossing of yours may be different from each other, but it will always be very difficult if the Lord is not with us. And we should always trust the Lord. The Lord is present with us. The Lord is always journeying with us. And if the Lord journeys with us, there is really nothing to fear.